When you hear the words Middle East, what comes to mind? Is it just conflict? It's a story we've all been told over and over again. The truth is, the idea that the Middle East is the center of all conflicts is a modern invention. It's a carefully constructed myth. Tonight, we're going to take that myth, put it under a microscope, and see what it's really made of. Lines drawn on maps by foreign powers, and the devastating consequences that continue to unfold to this very day. Why is the narrative of an eternally conflicted Middle East so pervasive? It boils down to power. Framing a region as inherently unstable gives immense leverage. It allows powerful nations to intervene. It's a narrative that has justified invasions and propped up dictators. This story has actively shaped the reality it claims to describe. We will start at the end of World War I, when the modern Middle East was born. We will look at secret deals like the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Our goal is to challenge the simple story and show how the seeds of today's turmoil were planted by outside forces. Before the chaos, there was an empire, the Ottoman Empire. For over 600 years, it was one of the most powerful dynasties in world history, stretching from the Balkans to the Persian Gulf. By the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was crumbling. When World War I erupted, the Ottomans sided with Germany. The war set the stage for the dismemberment of this ancient empire. Britain armed Arab nationalist movements, promising independence if they fought alongside the Allies. This fueled the dream of a unified, independent Arab nation. This hope would soon be shattered, laying the seeds of bitterness. While Arab rebels fought for liberation, a different conversation happened behind closed doors. In London and Paris, diplomats carved up the Middle East. Sir Mark Sykes and François-Georges Picot disregarded the people's lives. The chat resulted in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Promising Arabs a kingdom, Britain and France secretly agreed to slice up Ottoman lands. France would control Syria and Lebanon. Britain would take Iraq, Jordan and Palestine. This betrayal was the blueprint for future conflict. After the Bolshevik Revolution, the secret treaty was published. The promises were a lie. The trust was broken. When World War I ended, the Ottoman Empire was gone. The unified Arab state that had been promised was replaced by territories under British and French control. The League of Nations created mandates, creating new states with enforced borders. The Balfour Declaration promised a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, setting the stage for conflict. This trifecta was the bitter harvest of World War I in the Middle East. The dream of Arab independence was replaced with colonial rule. The seeds of turmoil were beginning to sprout. Just when you thought the story couldn't get more complicated, humanity discovered something that makes everything more complicated. Oil. Lots of it. Right under the sand where Britain and France had just drawn their new lines. In the 1920s and 30s, vast reserves of petroleum were found, particularly in Persia, now Iran, Mesopotamia, now Iraq, and the Arabian Peninsula. Suddenly, the strategic importance of the Middle East went from being about shipping lanes and colonial pride to something far more fundamental to the modern world. This wasn't just about controlling territory anymore. It was about controlling the fuel that would power the 20th century's cars, planes, factories, and armies. This discovery of black gold should have been a blessing for the people of the region. It was a resource that could have built schools, hospitals, and prosperous societies. Instead, it became a curse. The wealth didn't flow to the people. It flowed to Western oil companies and the pockets of the hand-picked rulers who were willing to play ball with them. Companies from Britain, France, and later the United States secured incredibly one-sided deals known as concessions. These agreements gave them exclusive rights to explore, drill, and export oil for decades, sometimes for a century, in exchange for a pittance in royalties paid to the local government. It was exploitation on a grand scale. The oil curse had another, more insidious effect. It made Western powers intensely interested in who was in charge in these newly formed countries. They didn't care about democracy or human rights. They cared about stability and, more importantly, a stable flow of cheap oil. This meant they had a vested interest in propping up compliant leaders, kings, emirs and shahs, who would protect their oil interests and quell any local discontent. Any leader who dared to suggest that maybe, just maybe, their country's natural resources should benefit their own people was immediately labeled a threat, a radical or a nationalist to be watched, and if necessary removed from power. So the very fabric of politics in the region became warped by oil. The old colonial game of controlling territory evolved into a new game of controlling resources through puppet rulers. This created a deep and simmering resentment among the populace. They saw their national wealth being siphoned away to foreign capitals while they remained in poverty. They saw their leaders as agents of foreign interests, not champions of their own people. The black gold that lay beneath their feet became a symbol not of potential prosperity, but of foreign domination and local corruption. It was another layer of grievance, another source of instability poured directly onto the smoldering embers left by World War I. After World War II, Britain and France were exhausted. Two new players, the United States and the Soviet Union, emerged. This was the Cold War. The Middle East, with its strategic location and oil, became a key chessboard. Every dispute was viewed through the lens of this global rivalry. In Iran 1953, the CIA orchestrated a coup against the democratically elected prime minister. They reinstalled the Shah. The Cold War turned the Middle East into a proxy battleground, flooding the region with weapons. While the superpowers were playing their global chess game, the most volatile issue planted back in the Mandate era was about to explode. This was the question of Palestine. After World War II and the horror of the Holocaust, international support for the Zionist cause grew immensely. Jewish refugees from Europe poured into the British Mandate for Palestine, seeking a safe haven. The dream of a Jewish national home, promised by the British in the Balfour Declaration, now seemed within reach. But this dream clashed directly with the reality on the ground, where an Arab majority feared that the creation of a Jewish state would mean their own dispossession and displacement. In 1947, a war-weary Britain handed the problem over to the newly formed United Nations. The UN proposed a partition plan, which would divide Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states, with Jerusalem administered as an international city. The Jewish leadership accepted the plan, seeing it as a historic opportunity to achieve statehood. However, the Arab states and the Palestinian Arab leadership rejected it outright. They viewed it as the culmination of colonial betrayal, the giving away of their land by foreign powers without their consent. The tensions that had been simmering for decades were now at a boiling point. The stage was set for war. On May 14, 1948, the day the British Mandate expired, Jewish leaders declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The very next day, armies from 5 neighboring Arab countries, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, invaded, determined to crush the nascent state. This was the first Arab-Israeli war. For Israelis, it was their war of independence, a desperate fight for survival against overwhelming odds. For Palestinians, it was the Nakba, or the catastrophe. During the fighting, an estimated 750,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes in the territory that became Israel, creating a refugee crisis that remains unresolved to this day. The war ended in 1949 with a decisive Israeli victory. Israel not only survived, but expanded its territory beyond the borders proposed by the UN partition plan. The conflict created a new, bitter reality. The Arab states refused to recognize Israel's existence, and the Palestinian refugees were scattered across the region in camps, their hopes for a state of their own shattered. This event became the central open wound of the Middle East. It wasn't just a border dispute, it was a fundamental clash of national narratives, and it would become the focal point for regional anger, superpower manipulation, and a cycle of wars. In 1956, 1967, and 1973, that would define the decades to come. By the 1970s, the Middle East was a gallery of strongmen. Authoritarian regimes propped up by superpowers promised stability but delivered oppression. Internal security forces crushed dissent, political life was choked, educated citizens wanted freedom and opportunity, but got corruption. The state became a cage, creating resentment. With political expression blocked, people turned to religion. This prepared the ground for a political earthquake. In 1979, Iran's seemingly immovable Shah regime crumbled. Inspired by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the opposition framed the struggle as a revolution against foreign domination. Khomeini returned to a hero's welcome, establishing the Islamic Republic of Iran. This sent shockwaves, challenging superpowers and regional rulers. In 1980, Saddam Hussein launched a full-scale invasion, leading to a brutal 8-year war. The dream of liberation became a region-wide nightmare, hardening the divide between Sunni and Shia. As Iran's revolution shook the Shia world, a different force was rising among Sunnis: political Islam, fueled by anger at corrupt regimes and foreign meddling. Afghanistan became the crucible. In 1979, the Soviet invasion triggered a massive US-backed insurgency. The CIA, with Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, armed the Mujahideen, pouring billions into the fight. Saudi Arabia spread its strict Wahhabi ideology, recruiting fighters from across the Arab world. Among them, Osama bin Laden. In Afghanistan, these volunteers became a global, radicalized network. They learned guerrilla tactics and forged a new ideology, one that saw victory over the Soviets as proof of divine favor. When the Soviets withdrew, these fighters turned their sights on a new enemy, the United States and its allies. This was the birth of Al-Qaeda, a shadowy, transnational threat, not a state, but a network. The West's Cold War strategy had created a new, unpredictable adversary. The unseen enemy was now armed, organized, and ready to strike. The Cold War ended, but peace was short-lived. In 1990, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, threatening global oil supplies. The US led a massive coalition to expel him. Operation Desert Storm was swift and decisive. But Saddam remained in power. Instead of regime change, the US and UN imposed crushing sanctions on Iraq. No-fly zones and embargoes isolated the country, but the real cost was borne by ordinary Iraqis. Infrastructure collapsed, hospitals emptied, and malnutrition soared. Saddam's regime survived, but the people suffered. A generation grew up under siege, fueling deep resentment. The sanctions, meant to weaken a dictator, instead devastated Iraq's middle class and strengthened his grip. The world saw a managed crisis. Iraqis lived a humanitarian disaster. The seeds of future chaos were sown in the rubble and bitterness of this lost decade. The West's solution created new grievances, with consequences that would soon explode. The region's wounds deepened, setting the stage for the next upheaval. The Middle East cycle of intervention and backlash continued, ever more volatile. September 11, 2001, Al-Qaeda struck the US, bringing the unseen enemy into the open. America launched the War on Terror, toppling the Taliban in Afghanistan. But the mission expanded. The Bush administration targeted Iraq, linking Saddam to terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. In 2003, the US invaded Iraq. The regime fell quickly, but chaos followed. Disbanding the Iraqi army and purging officials unleashed sectarian violence and insurgency. The power vacuum became a breeding ground for jihadists, including the rise of ISIS. The war, meant to bring stability, instead shattered Iraq and fueled global extremism. The US found itself trapped in a conflict it could not control. The dominoes kept falling, each intervention creating new crises. The Middle East was now the epicenter of a new, endless war. The consequences of these choices would haunt the world for decades. Amid the chaos, hope flickered, the Arab Spring. In 2010, protests erupted across the region, toppling dictators in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya. Social media fueled demands for dignity and freedom. For a moment, change seemed possible, but old regimes fought back. In Egypt, a military coup crushed democracy. In Bahrain, uprisings were brutally suppressed. Power vacuums led to chaos, not stability. External powers intervened, turning revolutions into proxy wars. Syria and Yemen became battlegrounds for regional and global rivals, unleashing humanitarian catastrophes. The promise of the Arab Spring died in civil war and repression. Hopes for self-determination were hijacked by violence and foreign agendas. The cycle of interference proved unbreakable. The region was left with failed states, endless wars, and shattered dreams. The brief spring gave way to a long, bitter winter. Why is the Middle East the center of conflict? Not because of ancient hatreds, but because of a century of outside interference. The myth of perpetual violence hides a history of borders drawn by outsiders, coups, and proxy wars. Ordinary people pay the price. Doctors, teachers, families, caught in cycles they didn't create. The forever war is not their destiny, but the result of repeated foreign meddling and broken promises. To understand the region, we must reject the old narrative and see its people's humanity and resilience. The real story is one of hope, struggle, and the enduring desire for dignity and control over their own future. The world's failure to learn from its mistakes keeps the cycle alive. The Middle East story is not finished. and neither is the world's responsibility to do better. So what happens now? Is the cycle doomed to repeat? It's easy to feel a profound sense of hopelessness, but that would be falling into the same trap. The first step towards breaking the cycle is to change the story. We have to start talking about the Middle East as a place deeply interconnected with our own history. Despite the grim headlines, there are signs of hope. The future of the Middle East will be written by them, not by foreign powers. The question is whether the world will finally have the wisdom to let them write it themselves.